Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of a silenced Glock 19 feels significantly colder when pressed against your temple. But for Julian, the freezing temperature of the steel was the only thing keeping him from fainting in the middle of the obsidian hall. I asked you a question, little mouse. The voice came from the left, smooth as whiskey and dark as a fresh grave. How did a server with cheap shoes and trembling hands get past the retinal scanners of the West Wing? And more importantly, a second voice echoed from the right, identical in pitch, but jagged with a volatility that promised violence. Why was a child holding a toy dinosaur wandering inside our private sanctuary? Julian couldn't breathe. He was on his knees, the plush velvet of the carpet soaking into his worn uniform pants. Above him stood the Vane twins, Kalen and Kieran, the devil's double vision, the rulers of the blackened underbelly of the city. And currently, the men holding Julian's life and the life of his 5-year-old son in their manicured, blood-stained hands. 5 hours earlier, the night had been about survival, not death. The Vane estate was not merely a house. It was a fortress carved from black marble and arrogance, perched on the cliffs overlooking a sea that looked like churning ink. Tonight was the Winter Gala, a masquerade of the city's elite, where politicians shook hands with warlords and the champagne cost more than Julian's rent for a decade. Julian needed the money. The medical bills for Leo's asthma were piling up, turning into a mountain that threatened to crush their tiny, drafty apartment. When the catering agency offered triple pay for the Vane Gala, Julian had swallowed his pride and his inexplicable, lingering dread and taken the shift. The problem was childcare. With Mrs. Gable in the hospital, Julian had no choice. He had smuggled Leo in, hiding him in the unused servants' quarters in the basement with a tablet, a bag of crackers, and his favorite plush dinosaur, Rex. "Stay here, Leo," Julian had whispered, kissing the boy's forehead. Leo's eyes, wide and intelligent, stared back. "Do not open the door. I'll bring you cake when I'm done." But Julian should have known better. Leo was a curious soul, a child who saw the world not as a place of rules, but as a puzzle to be solved. The gala was a blur of clinking crystal and hushed conversations about opium shipments disguised as trade tariffs. Julian kept his head down, his mask covering the upper half of his face, his movements efficient. He was invisible. He was nobody. Until the alarm triggered. It wasn't a loud siren. In the Vane estate, alarms were silent vibrations sent to the security detail. But the shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. The guards moved like wolves catching a scent. Julian's earpiece crackled. Asterisk, breach in the master suite. The twins are heading up. All staff, freeze. Asterisk. Julian's heart stopped. The master suite. The top floor. Leo. He didn't think. He dropped the tray of flutes, the crash of breaking crystal ignored as he bolted. He wasn't a server anymore. He was a father. He scrambled past the confused guests, tearing off his bow tie, his lungs burning as he sprinted toward the grand staircase. He had to get to Leo before they did. The master suite was a mausoleum of shadows and mahogany. It smelled of sandalwood, gunpowder, and old, expensive paper. When Julian burst through the heavy double doors, gasping for air, the scene before him froze the blood in his veins. The room was dimly lit. In the center stood 2 men. They were tall, broad-shouldered, wearing identical bespoke suits of charcoal gray. They radiated a terrifying, predatory grace. Kalen, the elder by 4 minutes, stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of icy indifference. Kieran, the younger, was leaning forward, a dangerous grin playing on his lips. And between them, small and unafraid, stood Leo. Leo wasn't crying. He wasn't shaking. He was looking up at the 2 most dangerous men in the hemisphere with a tilted head. "You look the same," Leo said, his small voice cutting through the heavy tension. Kieran crouched down, balancing on the balls of his feet, his movement akin to a panther preparing to pounce. "We are twins, little one. We usually look the same. The question is, how did you get in here?" Leo pointed a chubby finger toward the massive fireplace. Above it hung a portrait. It was covered by a velvet drape, but the drape had been half pulled down, likely by Leo dragging a chair over. The portrait revealed a young man sitting at a grand piano. He was ethereal, with hair like spun gold and eyes that held the sorrow of the world. He was laughing in the painting, a candid moment frozen in oil and canvas. Leo looked from the painting to the twins, and then he asked the question that shattered the room. Why is my Dada's photo in your castle? The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy enough to crush bones. Kalen's icy mask cracked. His eyes, sharp as diamonds, snapped from the child to the painting, and then back to the child. What did you say? That's my Dada, Leo insisted, clutching his dinosaur. He looks sadder now. But that's him. Why do you have him? Kieran stood up slowly, the playfulness gone. His face had gone pale, a ghost passing over his features. That is not your father, boy. That man died 5 years ago. No, Leo said stubbornly. Dada is downstairs. He's getting me cake. It was at that moment Julian stumbled into the room. Leo, Julian choked out, rushing forward, heedless of the danger. He grabbed his son, pulling him into his chest, shielding him with his own trembling body. I'm so sorry. Please, he didn't mean to intrude. I'll take him. We're leaving. Please don't hurt him. Julian kept his head bowed, terrified to look up. He knew the reputation of the Vane brothers. They didn't leave witnesses. They didn't show mercy. Look at me, Kalen's voice commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a decree of nature. Julian shook his head, clutching Leo tighter. Please, sir. Just dock my pay. Fire me. We'll disappear, I said. Kieran snarled, the sound of a gun slide racking echoing in the room. Look at us. Julian slowly lifted his head. His mask had slipped askew, revealing his eyes the color of a stormy sea. Eyes that widened in confusion as he finally took in the faces of the men threatening him. He expected to see monsters. Instead, he saw 2 men who looked as though they had just seen a ghost. Kalen took a step back, staggering as if physically struck. Kieran dropped the gun. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. Julian, Kalen whispered, the name tearing out of his throat like a prayer. Julian blinked. A sharp, piercing headache spiked behind his eyes, the same headache he got whenever he tried to remember the time before the accident. How? How do you know my name? Kieran moved. He didn't walk, he blurred. In a second, he was in front of Julian, dropping to his knees. His hands, shaking violently, reached out to cup Julian's face. Don't touch me. Julian flinched, scrambling backward, dragging Leo with him. Stay away. The rejection hit Kieran like a physical blow. He froze, his hands hovering in the air, his expression fracturing into pure agony. You don't remember? Remember what? Julian cried, panic rising. I've never met you. I'm just a waiter. Kalen stepped forward, his composure regained, but his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. He looked at the painting, then at Julian, then at the child. 5 years, Kalen said, his voice low and dangerous. We burned the city down looking for you. We tortured every rival family. We slaughtered the Ivanov cartel because we thought they took you. We buried an empty casket, Julian. I don't know what you're talking about. Julian shouted, the fear turning into defensive anger. My name is Julian Thorne. I was in a car accident 5 years ago. I woke up in a clinic in the outer districts. I don't know you. A clinic. Kieran laughed, but it was a broken, wet sound. A clinic run by whom? The syndicates? Our father. Kieran, Kalen warned, his hand landing on his brother's shoulder. He's terrified. Look at him. He's alive, Kay. Kieran choked out, looking at his brother. He's alive. I see him, Kalen said, his gaze locking onto Julian with the weight of gravity. And he has a child. Kalen crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with Julian. Julian, you are not a waiter. You are not Julian Thorne. You are Julian Vane. You are our husband. The world tilted on its axis. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. That's sick. You're lying. Am I? Kalen reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a silver locket. He clicked it open and turned it toward Julian. Inside was a picture. 3 young men. The twins, younger, less hardened, flanking a radiant, smiling Julian. They were kissing his cheeks. We were a triad, Kalen said softly. Soulmates. You played the piano for us in this very room. You called Kieran your storm and me your anchor. And then, you vanished. Julian stared at the photo. The headache screamed. Images flashed, fragments of memory. Asterisk warm hands. The smell of sandalwood. A piano melody. A fire. Screaming. A man in a white coat saying, "You are safe now. You have no past." Asterisk. The accident. Julian whispered. It wasn't an accident. No. Kieran growled, his eyes darkening with a murderous rage directed at the invisible enemy who had done this. Someone stole you. They wiped you. They hid you in the dirt so we couldn't find you. They made you a servant in your own home. Leo, who had been watching silently, tugged on Julian's sleeve. Dada, are they the bad guys? Julian looked at his son. Then he looked at the twins. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A pull. A magnetic resonance that hummed in his bones. I don't know, Leo, Julian whispered. We are not the bad guys, Kieran said fiercely, looking at the boy. We are the ones who are going to burn the world for what was done to your father. Enough, Kalen stood up. The ice was back, but now it was a shield. Julian, you are not leaving. Not tonight. Not ever. You can't keep me here, Julian said, though his voice lacked conviction. He felt weak, the adrenaline crashing. We can, Kalen said simply. And we will. You think we'd let you walk out those doors? You're ours. You've always been ours. But, Julian looked at the door. The gala? My job. The gala is over, Kieran said, pulling out his phone. He tapped a single button. Throughout the estate, the lights flickered and the security shutters began to descend. The estate is on lockdown. No one leaves until we find out who put you in that clinic. And the boy? Kalen asked, looking at Leo. He's my son, Julian said fiercely. Adopted him. He's everything to me. If you hurt him. If he is yours, Kieran said, a strange softness entering his eyes as he looked at the child who had found the one thing they couldn't. Then he is ours. Kalen. Kieran turned to his twin. The DNA test on the boy. Run it. Why? Julian asked, confused. I told you I adopted him. I found him abandoned outside the clinic 3 years ago. Kalen froze. He looked at Leo, really looked at him. The sharp jawline, the specific shade of gray in the eyes, the way he tilted his head. 3 years ago? Kalen asked. Yes. Kieran. Kalen's voice was barely a whisper. 3 years ago was when we tried the surrogacy program. Before we gave up hope. Kieran's eyes widened. The embryo was stolen. They told us it was destroyed in the lab raid. The twins looked at Leo. The timeline matched. The features matched. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. Julian had unknowingly adopted the child of the men he had forgotten. The universe hadn't just brought them back together. It had woven a knot so tight it could never be severed. He's not just yours, Julian, Kalen whispered, staring at the boy with a look of terrifying awe. He's ours. Biologically. Julian pulled Leo closer, overwhelmed. I can't process this. You don't have to, Kieran said, stepping forward. This time, he didn't ask. He reached out and scooped Julian up into his arms, bridal style. Julian gasped, instinctively wrapping his arms around Kieran's neck. The scent of sandalwood flooded his senses, triggering a cascade of memories. Asterisk lazy Sunday mornings, whispered promises, the feeling of being cherished, asterisk. Put me down, Julian protested weakly. Never again, Kieran vowed into his hair. Kalen picked up Leo, who didn't protest, merely patting Kalen's cheek with a sticky hand. Do you have cake? Leo asked. We own the bakery, Little Wolf, Kalen said, a rare, genuine smile breaking his stoic face. We will buy you every cake in the city. Where are we going? Julian asked, his head spinning as Kieran carried him toward the hidden door behind the bookshelf. To the panic room, Kalen answered, following them. We have 5 years of separation to bridge, and a list of people to kill for taking your memories. But first, Kieran stopped, looking down at Julian with eyes that burned with a possession that transcended time. First, we are going to remind you who you belong to. And if I don't remember? Julian whispered, a tear slipping down his cheek. Then we will make new memories, Kieran promised, pressing a kiss to Julian's forehead. A seal, a vow, a threat. Until every inch of you knows us again. As the secret door slid shut, sealing them away from the world, Julian realized something terrifying. He wasn't afraid of the twins anymore. He was afraid of how right it felt to be back in the cage of their arms. And that is how the lost bird returned to the twin vipers. If you enjoyed watching the Vane twins reclaim what was stolen from them, Destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who locked you away to protect you from the world? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, 3 characters, BL, Yaoi, man 1. Tall, muscular, sharp features, black hair, wearing charcoal gray suit, intense possessive expression, holding man 2 bridal style. Man 2. Slender, beautiful, messy blonde hair, wearing a cheap waiter uniform with unbuttoned collar. Expression of shock and vulnerability, clinging to man 1. Man 3. Tall, identical twin to man 1, cold expression but soft eyes. Holding a small boy in one arm. Boy, 5 years old, cute, holding a plush dinosaur. Background is a dark, luxurious Victorian office. Dim lighting. Fireplace. Large oil painting of man 2 on the wall covered by a half-draped velvet cloth. Dramatic shadows, cinematic composition, intricate details, atmosphere of tension and romance.